That night, when he first met Luvan and saw him at the window of room 605, he had only one thought in his head. At the end of the hotel corridor, he heard a loud scream. One of the visitors was swearing at the janitor because he came to him while he was taking a shower. The man was scolding him for not seeing the "Do Not Disturb" sign. So Hyon started apologizing. However, it was not enough for him. The guest started yelling even more and ordered him to call the manager. However, at the same moment, a towel flew at his head. The guy was puzzled to see this because, in fact, he was very scared of the angry man. However, while he was gritting his teeth and trying to understand who dared to do this to him, he was given an answer in advance. Luvan offered him to file a complaint if he had any problems and emphasized that so far everything looked like he wanted to get compensation. After that, he threw the money on the floor and said he would pay it in advance, advising him to take advantage of this opportunity. The man was just furious with anger, but he could not say anything. At the same time, the guy was surprisingly calm. The only thing that bothered him was the pleasant smell in the air. Suddenly, Luvan turned to him and asked if he could bring new towels to room 605. Peeking out from behind the door, the guy confirmed that he could do it. After that, he went to the service room. However, when he tried to replace the towels, he suddenly realized that they were already new because they had not been used before. He realized that the man didn't need to call him, and that it could only have been because he wanted to help him. Finally, Luvan told him that he could be free as soon as he finished his work. So, after a while, the guy said goodbye to him. Looking at the man's appearance, he could not take his eyes off him, although he tried to do it unnoticed. The man was standing by a window, the light from which fell on his handsome face, and he looked courageous and calm. He looked like an angel. The next day, the guy was in a hurry to get his work done and was worried that he was late because he had overslept because of insomnia. So he knocked on the first room he had to clean today to make sure that the guests had already checked out. However, his colleague opened the door for him. It turned out that he thought it was the 5th floor, although the guy explained that it was the 6th floor. Sandy asked him to switch because he felt sorry for the time he had wasted. However, Hyon didn't like the idea, so he smiled and said that he had already done everything in this room anyway. Hyon persistently tried to convince his colleague that there were only 2 rooms on the 6th floor for scheduled cleaning and 1 room with checkout. However, on the 5th floor there were 3 rooms for checkout, 2 of which had double beds. Sandy pretended to smile, but he was furious that this colleague was too demanding for a part-time employee. So he offered to clean the 4th floor for him. When he asked if it would be a problem if he cleaned the rooms there, Hyon nodded his head in approval. In fact, Sandy realized that he was just lucky that he had caught the eye of this particular guy, as he knew that the new guy would definitely not tell anyone. After a while, the guy sighed tiredly, taking off his mask and gloves. Finally, after a hard day, he could go home. However, suddenly, near the elevator, he heard someone arguing with someone and shouting that he didn't have to tell him twice. At the same second, Luvan came out to meet him, and he was ordering someone to deal with something. Suddenly, their eyes collided, forcing them both to stop and think of a reason to talk. So, the man asked if it was hot outside. The boy was embarrassed, but answered that it was not. He wanted to continue his story, but as he shifted from one foot to the other, he could not think of anything. So he silently bowed to the man and wished him a good evening. The man looked at him and walked on. Hyon watched in confusion as Luvan left the hotel and, suddenly, smelled the same pleasant aroma again. After the end of the day, the boy returned home, but not very good news was waiting for him. His uncle started yelling at him and accusing him of not even knowing how much it costs to live in this part of New York, and that if it weren't for him, he would have been kicked out on the street long ago. Tears were coming to his eyes. However, since there was no other way out, he began to beg the man to forgive him. The uncle pointed to the easel and asked if he remembered that the paintings had already been postponed for 2 months. Hyon promised that he would finish all these works as soon as possible and would not let him down. Finally, the man slammed the door and emphasized that the guy should keep his word, as it would be worse for everyone later. As soon as the apartment fell silent, Hyun froze in place and could not move, wondering what he should do next. Then he went out to the balcony. He lit a cigarette and began to remember Luvan's face and his help. The whole evening passed like that. The next day, he continued his work. Finally, he was informed that the guest from room 605 was checking out today, which meant that he would not see Luvan again. Hyon froze for a moment, as he felt that if he saw him at least one more time, he would be able to start painting again. He remembered how a woman came with that man from time to time, and how he was pleased to see such beautiful people. It seemed strange to him, but the man was the only one who made him want to pick up a brush.
The guy was so immersed in his dreams and memories that he didn't notice his colleague walking across the street.
Hyon felt that something was wrong when he started shouting at him and accusing him of inattention. However, as soon as Sandy asked if he was looking around, the guy started apologizing and asked if he was okay. After that, he said that this was the 6th floor and he shouldn't be cleaning here. My colleague barely got up and said that he was aware of this. However, when he realized that he could be caught, he began to make excuses that he was just passing by. While quietly putting the Rubik's Cube away, he explained that he had gotten off at the wrong place. After that, he asked to take away his garbage. Finally, he said that he hadn't done anything on this floor, so he ordered the guy to clean up properly. A few minutes later, Hyon found himself in room 605 and looking around noticed that all the things were in their places, as if no one had used them. He went on, wondering what he saw, as he believed that the man must have stayed here to live. Suddenly, he noticed the sign under his feet and began to worry that he had made a mistake. He also wondered if he should tell the manager about it. However, before he could leave, a woman approached him and asked what he was doing here. The guy explained that he hadn't noticed the sign falling, so she asked if he had cleaned the room. As soon as Hyon said that he had already done it and apologized, the woman replied that she understood and thanked him. So he left the room, breathing a sigh of relief, thinking that he was very lucky that everything had gone peacefully. However, things were not as he had thought. It turned out that the woman who had followed him had other plans for him. After that encounter, the guy woke up to a bright light shining directly into his eyes. At first, he thought he was dead and lying in the morgue. However, he jumped up in surprise when he heard someone asking him if he had regained consciousness. Opposite him, the woman from the room was sitting and apologizing for Tatum's failure to control the dose of sleeping pills. She said it was the only way to get him here. It turned out that the person they were talking about was sitting next to them using a laptop, and was surprised by this explanation because it was the woman who explained to him that the situation was an emergency. She introduced herself and said her name was Bella. Then she asked if he had met Luvan before, pointing at him. The guy looked around and saw a man not far from him who was already familiar to him. The same handsome man was sitting by the window. His face shone in the moonlight, evoking unshakable calm. Hyon began to ask why he was here again, since this was the hotel he had been working at lately. So they explained that they had followed him after his shift and took the opportunity to use sleeping pills to put him to sleep. At the same time, the woman advised him not to worry, as they used a safe drug that is not harmful to health. Bella said that this is how Tatum brought him here. Nevertheless, the guy asked again why he was still here. She reminded him that they had met before in front of the room where he was supposed to clean. He admitted that he remembered her, but realized that they wanted something else from him. And when he heard the woman ask if he had taken anything with him, he was terrified, so he replied that he hadn't taken anything from the room. Tatum and Bella looked at each other because they hadn't expected this turn of events. Finally, the woman took hold of her head and told him that she would be honest with him. She said that they had left something important in the room, but that they had lost it today. Looking at the puzzled boy, she clarified that it was something missing. She also added that they knew that he was the only one responsible for cleaning the 6th floor in this hotel. Therefore, it was not surprising that all the suspicions fell on him, as everything matched. The guy started asking if he understood correctly that they had a certain amount of money missing. Bella tiredly emphasized that in their circle there was something more valuable and important than money. The boy did not understand what could be more important, so he assumed that it was jewelry. However, this answer was also wrong. So he looked around, trying to understand what was being asked of him. But this made him even more anxious. Finally, the woman asked him again to think hard and remember if he had seen anything unusual. Hyon began to recall the day they had met and began to mumble that besides him, Sandy, his co-worker, was there. Bella slammed her hand on the table and emphasized that they had to find him as soon as possible. After that, she said she had one more request for him. The boy was puzzled, worried about what else they would want from him now. However, he calmed down a bit when they asked him to simply drop by room 605 more often after he finished work and tell them about the day's events. Watching the furious Bella, he realized he couldn't refuse, so of course he agreed. Tatum advised him to act naturally and said that they didn't want the problem to get any bigger. As soon as the man wanted to tell him what would happen if things went wrong, the guy stopped him and said he understood. In fact, he was so scared that he didn't even want to know what would happen otherwise. The next day, Hyon tried to tune into his workday by taking deep breaths. Finally, he gathered his strength and knocked on that ill-fated room 605, saying that he had come to clean up. However, when he opened the door and apologized for disturbing him, he froze in surprise. The first thing that caught his eye was a gun lying on the coffee table, not far from the chair. Then he noticed a man who said tiredly that it didn't look like it was hot today. The man swallowed the saliva that was stuck in his throat in fright and agreed that it was. Louvain asked him if he was always this slow and emphasized that he would never have thought so. So the guy had to apologize. In fact, the man thought he was a little strange, so he asked everything he had just said and let him start cleaning. Of course, everything that was happening around him was of great interest to him, but he had to do his job in silence. Meanwhile, Louvain's phone rang. When Tatum asked what the Asian man was doing, he replied that he was cleaning the bathroom. Instead, he asked if he had found out anything. He said that Sandy was in hiding and that his phone was found in a trash can. He also added that all the data on the SIM card had been erased and that the cameras showed nothing. The man began to ask furiously what would happen next. So Tatum replied that it would be done in 5 days. As soon as he finished talking, the guy opened the door and said he was done, asking if there was anything else he needed to do. Louvain sat down on the sofa next to the bed and said that he was waiting for a report on today's activities. The guy said that they had a new hire and that the manager said he would replace Sandy. Louvain asked if that was all the information, and the man waved his hand and said yes. This was not surprising to the man. He expected that Hyon would not be very helpful. He also doubted him, even though he tried to cooperate. He told the man that Tatum had left him a small gift on the table, which surprised him. The man explained that he wanted to apologize for what had happened, so he decided to give him a bottle of champagne and a cake. The guy sat down at the table and stared at the piece of dessert on the plate. He was sorry to eat it because it looked so good. Louvain noticed his hesitation, so he asked him what he was doing and why he wasn't going to eat. In fact, the boy had a feeling that the cake would fall to pieces as soon as he touched it, so he wanted to leave it alone. However, realizing that it looked a bit strange from the outside, he said that he would eat it with pleasure, carefully cutting off a piece. But as soon as it was in his mouth, it immediately gave him a whole range of pleasure and delight. Louvain slowly watched the boy and was amazed at his enthusiasm for a small piece of dessert. In turn, Hyon couldn't stop because it was the first time he had ever tasted something like this. And it was so delicious. He was so excited that he didn't even notice how the cream got on his face, so he began to wipe it off, licking his fingers. Watching this, the man couldn't look away, realizing that he was enjoying it. However, he suddenly stopped himself, surprised at his reaction to such a simple action on the part of the boy. Luvan began to reassure himself that it was all because he was just tired, and it didn't mean anything. The man thanked him for the hospitality and said that he had to go, promising that he would be here tomorrow at the same time. Suddenly, however, the man asked him to wait and asked if he really didn't want to ask for any reward for his help. Hyun had to pretend that such questions were quite normal and answer that he did not want anything from them. However, Luvan did not believe in the guy's good intentions and asked him why he did not want anything. The boy replied that it was because they were constantly talking about something that was very important to them. So that was the reason. He also reminded him that they asked him for help. The man listened to him, but he thought it was all a lie. He did not believe that the guy could be so simple, so he decided to find out whether he was telling the truth or not. The next day, Hyon came at the same time and asked if the man needed to change his towels. Taetom smiled and said hello and allowed him to come inside the room, despite the communications equipment and weapons on the bed. After that, he asked the guy if he could sit next to him for a while. Hyon was puzzled, but agreed. Sitting down next to him, he began to tell him in a monotone that nothing had happened that day. The man interrupted him and said that he already knew this would happen. Instead, he offered him coffee or cake. However, he refused. Taetom didn't listen to him anyway. He held up a plate with a piece of dessert and assured him that he was the kindest of the three. The man was very persistent, so the boy had to agree and thank him for the hospitality. In fact, he was very scared to refuse several times in a row, so he realized that he had to eat it. Suddenly, the door to the room opened, and Tatum was delighted to see that Luven had finally returned. The man entered the room and began to ask him about his work. The latter replied that things were going a bit strangely. Hyon couldn't take his eyes off his new acquaintance who had just walked in, admiring his image. Meanwhile, the men were discussing Sandy and the fact that the bastard had fled to Mexico after being fired. Luvan was angry at Titum for knowing such important information and yet still being here. He tapped him on the shoulder and emphasized that he was just waiting for his flight so he could leave now. Finally, Tatum smiled and said that he would contact him as soon as everything was settled. He also promised the guy that they would see each other again. Then he left, leaving them alone in the room. Hyun began to apologize for the fact that he still had a piece of cake in his hands that he hadn't had time to eat. The man sat down on the chair and said that he could eat it himself, since there was no one else to do it. Swallowing hard, the boy looked at the plate and said that he would eat everything with pleasure. He realized that he didn't belong here anymore, so he decided that he needed to get it over with and leave. The boy tasted the dessert and could not get enough of its sweet qualities and pleasant aroma. Luvan pretended to be on the phone with someone, but he was worried about what he saw. The fact that the cake was being eaten with such pleasure. In addition, it seemed strange to him that he was seeing the dessert for the first time in his life and blushing like a child. The man blamed himself for continuing to watch this and did not understand what was wrong with him at all. The guy noticed that Luvan was very nervous about something, but he tried to pretend that he hadn't seen anything. A few days passed since then. The car where Bella and Luvan had just met had just left the hotel. Looking at something on her tablet, the woman asked how his meeting went. The man coldly replied that everything was fine, although he recalled that he had been treated to desserts. Despite the fact that it was a gift, he did not want it, as he did not like sweets, unlike the other guy. However, recalling that time, he noticed that it was the first time he had seen a guy without a mask. He thought that Hyun's facial features were typical of Asians and that he was handsome. The image of the guy was constantly running through his mind, so it was useless to deny that he liked his appearance. However, he believed that this did not mean that he liked this rather boring man. In his opinion, he just ate desserts and was no different from anyone else. However, he often wondered if he would ever see that happy face again if he gave him all those sweets. So he suddenly ordered the driver to turn the car around and go to the hotel on 6th Avenue, which greatly confused Bella, who asked if it was urgent to do this today. The man was furious at this question, so she said yes. However, in her mind, she was ready to kill him. After a while, Luvan gathered all the possible desserts from the hotel on one table, turned on the music, and was waiting to see the guy's expression. He was really surprised to see such a gift for himself. He also did not know how to react. Such treats were becoming more frequent, so the guy assumed that there might be some hidden meaning in it. However, he didn't have time to think about it, as he also worked at night in a beer bar near the hotel, trying to earn a little extra money. That night, two men were there, drinking heavily and discussing their business. After a while, they ran out of alcohol, so one of them called a guy to bring them more. In addition to them, several other visitors asked for beer, so the guy tried to keep up. When the working day was coming to an end, he could hardly feel his legs. In addition, Hyon was very sleepy. However, just like in the previous days, he had to finish everything again at dawn. His co-worker noticed his fatigue, so he said he would close everything himself and asked him to tell his uncle that he would meet him tomorrow. So Hyon thanked him and headed out. But in the backyard, he noticed a couple kissing. However, his eyes were drawn to the color of the man's hair, which reminded him of the man from the hotel. He stared at them so much that the man noticed and started yelling at him. Luckily, it was not the person he thought it was. The guy was very surprised because he had already assumed that it was Luvan, although he realized that the man would not go to such places. As soon as he got home, he went straight to bed. However, he had a very strange dream. There he was with Luvan, who tried to convince him that he wanted to be with him. After that, the man wanted to kiss him. At that very second, the guy felt tenderness, and it was very sweet. He also suddenly started talking about time and the need to wake up. Therefore, these words seemed very strange, based on the plot of the dream. Eventually, Hyon opened his eyes and realized that he had dreamt it all, although it seemed quite real. That day, as usual, he went to the same hotel room to clean, where Luvan was waiting for him. The man was happy to see him and immediately greeted him. He was waiting for the boy's reaction to the gift. However, since the man did not explain anything, Hyon assumed that the package was garbage and should be thrown away. Suddenly, the man got up and asked the boy why he hadn't eaten. He did not understand, so he asked him again what was meant. Luvan started to get nervous and emphasized that he was talking about what he had left on the table behind him. The guy did not expect that it was for him, so he explained that he just misunderstood him and was not sure he could eat it. However, Luvan still could not understand how this could happen because he had written him a note. The guy started scratching his head and admitted that he couldn't read, and that he only knew how to read numbers. Hearing this, the man sat him down at the table and once again emphasized that all these desserts were for him. The guy bowed gratefully. However, this behavior seemed strange to him, so he thought he needed to make sure what it all meant. Luvan was going crazy with anticipation. He noted that he was no longer writing, but saying everything in words. So I asked him to just eat. All the sweets on the table made the boy's eyes run wide. Besides, everything looked so appetizing that he didn't even know what to choose. In the end, Hyon decided to start with the cake, which turned out to be incredibly sweet and delicate in taste. Despite the fact that the cake was incredible last time, this dessert was nothing compared to it. The boy enjoyed the crispy cookies and sweet cream with fruit so much that he even closed his eyes. Luvan again pretended not to watch him, but he couldn't help but notice the crumbs that remained on the boy's chin. So he couldn't resist trying to help him get rid of them by touching his face with his hand. The boy felt a little embarrassed but did not object to such actions and simply thanked him. In fact, at that moment he was interested in what he had just eaten, so he asked the man what it was called. He told me that it was a tart. He also explained that from time to time he receives desserts as gifts, although there is no one to eat them. That's why he promised to bring them here. The boy listened attentively to the man, but suddenly began to feel that something was wrong with his throat. In addition, his hands began to tremble and seemed to be pierced by small needles. Hyon jumped up from his seat, not believing that this could happen to him. The man tried to ask what was happening, but he did not understand anything. He pointed to his neck, tried to explain that he was having trouble breathing, and decided to go to the bathroom. After that, he did not remember anything. Some time later, he found himself on the bed, connected to an intravenous drip. His head hurt a lot, so he wondered what had happened. The man began to accuse him of being a fool, as he was allergic to peanuts and continued to eat everything. However, Hyan admitted that he didn't know that because he had never eaten anything like that before. So he looked down and said that next time he would have to check everything before eating. In addition, he said that he would have to wait until the IV was finished to carefully remove it. The guy was surprised that he thought this was normal and asked if they would really be together for a while. Luvan was surprised and angry at the same time by this question, as he did not see anything wrong with it. Hyan felt very embarrassed, so he asked if he was really going to be here with him all this time. Luvan stood up and emphasized that he could not leave a sick person alone. After that, he advised him not to talk nonsense and to start resting. The guy agreed with him and went back to bed. He also thanked the man for the desserts and for his help. The man nodded his head and told him to close his eyes instead of talking about unnecessary things. Hyan smiled happily and said that he would do just that. For the first time in a long time, he felt comfortable and secure. While the boy was sleeping peacefully and dreaming colorful dreams, the tap in the restroom was open and water was flowing. Luvan was there, scolding himself for not planning to do it. He thought that he should have just gone somewhere else, finished his work and rested. However, the problem was that he didn't want to leave right now, and it was tearing his heart to pieces. As soon as the man came back into the room and started watching the boy sleep peacefully, he couldn't believe he was doing something like this for someone. Luvan sat down next to him, touched his face, and thought that he was indeed a strange but interesting guy. In the dream, Hyan went back to that winter day when he was a little boy and was crying in the yard. He was shivering from the cold because he was not dressed for the weather and begged his uncle to take him to his father. However, he said that his father had abandoned him long ago. So the boy began to ask to be taken to his mother because he missed her very much. Some time later, Luvan was talking to Taetom on the phone, wondering if the man was in the police station. However, while he was pouring himself a drink, he explained that Sandy was in a Mexican prison because he had tried to stab people on the main avenue. He also emphasized that now he would need more time. Otherwise, it would be better to contact Armuka and ask the cartel to deal with it. Luvan said that he was getting tired of this and added that such an elaborate escape plan could not have been carried out by him alone. So he suggested that someone was helping him. When Taetom asked what to do next, the man replied that there was no need to disturb others and said that Sandy would stay alive until they found the location of the thing. Then, sitting down on the couch, he asked to send him the information about the Asian guy he had asked for earlier. Taetom was surprised, as he hadn't noticed anything suspicious about the janitor. Nevertheless, Luvan ordered him to just do his job. After a while, he laid down on a lounge chair by the pool and started reading everything he knew about the guy. He was surprised that he worked in a hotel during the day and in a pub at night. He thought it must have been too exhausting for him. There were some other details of Hyan's life that he did not expect to hear. It was that he was always painting pictures. This was quite unexpected, because Luvan didn't think he would see him as an artist as well. Looking at his photo, he saw him as a mystery. He loved to draw, despite the fact that he could not read. The next morning, Hyan woke up in a good mood because a delicious breakfast had already been prepared for him. But while he was eating, the man asked if he was allergic to cream. Tasting the dessert, the guy replied that he was not allergic to this product. After that, he thanked him for bringing him so many sweets and said that he was embarrassed to eat everything alone. Luvan asked him to forget about it and explained that he doesn't eat sweets anyway. In addition, he said that he brought it all for him. He also told the boy to talk less and eat faster, because he had told him earlier that he still needed to clean the other room. In fact, watching the guy, he saw something strange in him. For example, that while working 2 jobs, he had never eaten anything like this. although he assumed that Hyon might be completely in debt. New York is full of people in that situation. Driving away the annoying thoughts, he reassured himself that he would catch Sandy soon anyway, and there would be no more reason to keep an eye on this guy. Suddenly, he asked him if his next shift was really on Tuesday. He said yes and explained that he had Monday off. Telling everything the man was interested in, Hyun enjoyed every bite of the cake. Luvan was trying to work, but he kept getting distracted by him, evaluating his every action. However, when the boy noticed this and began to ask what was wrong, he became visibly nervous and noticed that nothing had happened. Instead, ashamed, he began to ask if the boy had a cell phone, as they should have kept in touch all the time. When he heard that he didn't have one, he gave him his own. After a while, a meeting began at the hotel to investigate the whereabouts of this thing. Bella noted that it was still undetermined and said that only if the power was turned on or there was an attempt to unlock it would she be able to locate it. Luvan asked what are the chances that they just don't know it has already happened. The woman emphasized that this was absolutely impossible and suggested that they postpone this issue for now. After analyzing the situation, she assured me that the thing was obviously not stolen to be transferred to the museum, and they would find out about it sooner or later. Taetom agreed with her. Then he noticed that Luvan seemed to be in a suspiciously good mood today. The man was indeed smiling, but he did not want to share anything personal, emphasizing that he just thought he was. Meanwhile, Hyun went to the store he frequented in search of the right paint color. Jack offered him a color close to strawberry red, and he thanked him for his help in finding it. The man noticed that this color was different from what the guy usually bought, so he assumed that he was working on something interesting. Finally, the salesperson noticed that the man had been using the Sea Wave paint he bought last time for a long time, so he offered him a bottle of quick-drying agent. However, Hyon started to refuse the offer, explaining that he didn't have much money with him today. Jack insisted, so the guy clutched the gift in his hands, thanked him, and said goodbye, promising to come back next time. As soon as he got home, he started looking at the phone Luvan had given him for communication. It was a bit strange for him, as he thought that he could have just talked to him in room 605 as usual, or kidnapped him like last time. However, despite all the strange thoughts, he agreed that this was indeed a more peaceful way of communication. Anyway, Hyon didn't really know how to use the device, as he had never had anything like it. So he put it on the table next to him, deciding that he would just keep it for now, just in case. After that, he started painting his picture, trying to focus on the colors and their shades. In the evening, he went back to the pub for his shift, where he noticed his new friends at a table. The woman started asking him if he was busy. The guy was puzzled that they knew about his second job, so he asked what they were doing here. Taetom explained that he had a job in Brooklyn and mentioned that the bar where he worked was nearby. He also advised them not to worry about them and to go about their business. While he was saying this, Luvan tried to pretend that he was very busy and talking to someone on the phone. Hyon felt a little calmer, so he offered to let him know if they needed anything. However, when he returned to the bar, his colleague began to ask him who these people were and if he knew them. The man told him that they were guests staying at the hotel where he worked and said that they just happened to see him. The man was satisfied with this answer, and then he ordered him to clean the toilet and put in new toilet paper. So Hyon started to do what he was told, and suddenly found out that they were running out of supplies. He headed to Finley to tell him about it, but froze when he saw a familiar face standing in front of him. Luvan was standing by the door to the restroom, his hands folded in front of him. He asked him if he had finished. The guy replied that he was, and asked if he had really been waiting all this time for him to clean up. However, he replied that he didn't need to worry about it. Hyon walked past him and reached out to open the faucet, wondering how the man had even managed to get in. The man started asking about his boss and asked if he was a relative. He replied that he was just a colleague. Suddenly, Luvan noticed that Hyon's belt was loose, so he offered to help him fix it. The guy looked around in confusion, but said he could do it himself. The man began to tie his apron and told him not to move, otherwise he would not be able to do a good job. Luvan got closer to him, so the guy's heart started pounding and almost jumped out of his chest. Sometime later, on the yacht, there was a massacre of the one who dared to flee to Mexico and take a valuable thing. Luvan sat on a chair, holding a gun, and asked the man where the thing he had taken from them was. The man crawled on the floor, trying to explain that he had thrown everything away, and said that he had just done what he was told. He said the stranger had promised him $3 million for it, so he just stole the thing, but he didn't know what it was. The man was calmly finishing his cigarette, waiting for Sandy to put him on the trail of the main thief. However, he said that when he contacted the man, he told him that the item was worth much more, so he threw it away and ran away. Sandy promised to help find the thief and admitted that he had given the item to an Asian co-worker named Hyon. The man asked if this was true, but realized what his answer would be, the one that could not be true. That night, Hyon was enjoying a warm shower, as he was incredibly tired. He knew he had to go to the hotel tomorrow, so he wanted to go to bed early. However, as soon as he walked out the door, he immediately heard a strange sound that kept him awake. It turned out that it was the ringing of his phone, which had been lying idle on his desk until then. Hyon began to worry because he didn't know what to do with it and why it had suddenly started vibrating. Recalling what people do when someone calls them, he assumed that he should press one of the buttons on the screen, which he subsequently did. After that, he exhaled a sigh of relief as the call ended. The guy looked at the phone and tried to figure out what was going on. However, his fright had no bounds when the device started buzzing again and an annoying call appeared. Hyon thought that first he should try to press something again and tried to slide his finger across the screen. Finally, a familiar voice came out of the phone. He put the phone to his ear and said hello. He felt calmer when he realized that the voice belonged to Luvan. However, he started asking why he hadn't answered the first call. Hyon explained that he simply did not know how to answer the call and did not realize who was calling him. When the man told him that only he knew the number, he began to ask why he needed to know. Luvan replied that sometimes such situations arise. The man asked if he had a job at the hotel tomorrow. When he heard that he did, he told him to bring his phone with him to teach him how to use it. Hyon was even more excited when the man promised him that he could keep the device, as he had several more at home. The next day, the guy came to room 605, sat on the bed, and couldn't wait for Luvan to come. He realized that the man had just given him his phone, but he had a feeling that they had become a little closer because of it. Suddenly, the phone rang again. Hyon picked up the phone, greeted Luvan, and said that he was in the room. However, the man said that he had urgent business and could not come. He also said that they could see each other next time and hung up. Hyon lowered his head and remembered that something had indeed happened, and he kept forgetting about it. Sighing heavily, he realized that he shouldn't expect anything from other people, so he decided to go home. At the same time, Bella told Luvan that she had already sent his luggage. She also added that Tatum had promised to take care of the rest. Rubbing his face, the man said that this was great news and that he would contact them when he was done. After that, he ordered them to hit the road. Bella was surprised that they had to leave right away, but the man emphasized that their stay was planned to be temporary. The woman started yelling, noting that he was in a bigger hurry than usual. As a result, she asked him what he was up to. She also asked why they didn't wait and fly on a private jet as usual. Luvan assured her that a helicopter would be much faster. The woman walked behind him and kept arguing with him. She said that the more determined he was, the more suspicious he seemed. Bella was really nervous and couldn't figure out if there was a reason to fly to New York right now, because nothing had changed recently. Although, she did suspect something. So, as soon as they approached the runway and her husband wanted to get on board, she called him over. After that, she asked him if it was true that the reason he was world because of Hyon and everything because of it. The man stopped and asked why she thought so. So the woman explained that it was the only thing that came to her mind. Luvan smiled and assured her that he couldn't answer this question yet, so everything would be resolved in time. That same evening, Hyon sat on his bed and could not calm himself down. He was waiting for a call from his husband, but realized that he might be busy. He wished he knew how to use the new device because he could have called the man himself. Although he scolded himself for such thoughts, as he did not understand whether he had the right to do so, so all that was left was to wait. Hyon tried to fall asleep with the phone in his hands and force himself to stop waiting. The next day he sat sadly at the door after his uncle left him. He had been waiting for this moment because, fortunately, that day the man had only slapped him once. Hyon decided to take a few days off work and paint because he needed time for the paint to dry. However, he was not upset because no matter how much time passed, he finally had something he really wanted to paint. And it was all thanks to one person who had so suddenly appeared in his life, providing incredible inspiration. With each stroke of the pencil, new lines appeared, forming a single continuous picture. A lot of time had passed, and Hyon was getting tired. He stretched out on his chair and decided to take a break by smoking a cigarette. However, he remembered that the pack had run out yesterday. He was going to buy another one today, but he forgot. So he took the box from the top shelf and decided to see how much money he had left, because the last thing he received was put in this box. Among the pencils, brushes, and other small items, he did find some money, which he decided to spend immediately on cigarettes. On his way to the store, which was not far from his house, he suddenly noticed something interesting. On the other side of the street, a new establishment had opened that he had never seen before. Hyon walked closer as he was curious about what was being sold there and began to look in the windows. He noticed that the place had a very good layout and a pleasant aroma of sweets. Suddenly, his eyes fell on a display case with cakes. It turned out to be the same dessert he had eaten at the hotel. The girl seller immediately noticed the strange guy who did not dare to go inside. He felt very ashamed and decided to run away as quickly as possible, as it looked very suspicious. Hyon was in such a hurry that he did not notice anyone on his way. He had only one goal in mind, to get home. So when he finally got home, he immediately went out on the balcony because he felt very hot. Suddenly, his phone, which he had placed on the stairs next to him, started buzzing again. Hyon picked up the phone excitedly, expecting to hear Luvan's voice, but it was silent. After that, the man greeted him and asked if he was home today. The guy continued the conversation, noticing that a very expensive car had arrived in their yard, and replied that the bar was closed today. Suddenly, the car door opened. The man was surprised that the bar was closed on Tuesday. However, the guy just confirmed it. Hyon answered all the questions, looking out with interest and waiting for the man to get out of the car. Finally, the man left the driver's seat and said he wanted to go upstairs. Hyon entered the apartment and began to feel nervous. He wondered how the man could know where he lived. However, he realized that Taetom could have told him about it. Finally, there was a knock at the door. As soon as he opened it, he noticed a man smiling in front of him. Luvan noticed that the man seemed to be doing well, which surprised the puzzled boy. Hyon was covered in ants from head to toe. However, he gathered his strength and asked what brought him here. Without waiting for an invitation, the man brazenly went inside and emphasized that he had something to say. Suddenly, he stopped short of finishing his story and asked if the guy really lived here. Looking around, he realized that the apartment was nicer than he had expected, although it was quite small. He sat down on a chair and thought that he could easily cross this entire area in a couple of steps. Watching the guy, he realized that he probably wouldn't feel very comfortable living here, let alone painting in such a small space. It was very much like a small rabbit's home in a limited space. Finally, he started asking Hyon how often he painted. He replied that he did it whenever he felt like it. Luvan put his hand to his chin and said that he did not believe that he had recently taken up painting because he could not see any other paintings. Hyon said he gave them away to pay the rent. When the man asked if his uncle had taken them, he was very surprised. Luvan said it was just a guess, and it looked like rent. However, he clarified that it could be considered living expenses. The man asked if he was also giving back the salary he earned at the hotel and bar. The guy replied that he did. Hyon was very embarrassed, so he tried to justify himself and explain why this was happening. However, the man smiled, interrupting his efforts, and offered him a taunt. Hyon did not expect this turn of events and, for a moment, could not even say a word. Then he agreed. Finally, they both headed to a nearby store. Going down the stairs, Hyon obediently followed behind. Suddenly, Luvan stopped and asked if he had followed him too easily. He immediately apologized. The man emphasized that one should not follow another person so freely just because he was offered food. Hyon explained that he did it now only because it was him, Luvan, because he asked him to follow him. The man started laughing, not understanding how he was able to live safely to the present day. After a while, they got into the man's car, and in front of Hyon, there were delicious cakes that looked even better than the last time. Luvan smiled and offered the guy to just eat them all. However, he was very uncomfortable and hesitated. Luvan emphasized that it was not for the exhibition, so he said he could eat whatever he wanted. Hyon asked if the man wanted to do it with him. However, the man reminded him that this question was inappropriate. He turned away and said that he would not watch so he could eat in peace. He also said that he would turn on the air conditioner because he noticed that he was hot. The guy hesitantly thanked him for everything. The man, on the other hand, emphasized that he should eat more. In fact, the man looked at him and realized that the result of the second investigation was the same. He thought that he was simply stunned that he was still being deceived by his uncle. It became clear to him that the boy had been exploited from the very beginning, and it was still going on. Luvan realized that he shouldn't interfere in the boy's affairs, but he just couldn't ignore him. This feeling was similar to a painting he had recently seen, which was awkward and gloomy, but at the same time, magical. The only thing the man realized from looking at it was that he was really talented, and his uncle was a fraud who used paintings to make a living. Clutching the steering wheel in his hands, he was outraged that the man had probably sold them for a very good price. The guy noticed that Luvan was seriously thinking about something, so he asked him if he was okay. He smiled and said that he just suddenly wanted to buy something. He also advised him not to worry about anything and to eat more. It seemed very strange to the man that even though he was abused by his uncle, he was able to develop his talent. Luvan couldn't take his eyes off the boy's eating, and recalled that at first he thought he was just an ordinary worker who could draw, but it turned out to be a real gem. Finally, he touched his chin and noticed that he had eaten so fast that he hadn't even noticed the crumbs falling on his face. Leaning over, he realized that he was indeed slow in many ways, so I advised him to continue enjoying his meal. The man was mesmerized by him and wondered why the boy's skin was so soft, like a baby's. He understood that he was not on any special diets or using creams, but these thoughts drove him crazy. They spent an hour together, after which Hyon returned to his apartment and Luvan stayed in the car. After that, he called the guy and asked if he had changed the settings on his phone. He replied that he had switched it to vibrate mode. While watching the car, the guy heard the man say that he had some business tomorrow, so he wouldn't be able to come to the hotel. Hyon was a little upset that he would be busy. So Luvan told him that he needed to take care of some things that he had been putting off lately. The guy listened to him and then admitted that when he knocked on his door today, he felt a little strange. He also added that he was usually the one who knocked on room 605 every day and said that he had come to clean up. However, when the man asked if this meant that he didn't like the fact that he had knocked, he replied that it was not that, but that someone wanted to come to him. Luvan listened to him but emphasized that he needed to go to bed as soon as possible as it was getting late. So Hyon said he would do so. In fact, the man realized that this was becoming a problem for him, as it was becoming more and more difficult for him to restrain himself. He smiled, noting that he was no longer a teenager, but he still behaved like one at times. However, despite the fact that several days had already passed, Louvain had not appeared with him, and this was upsetting the boy. As he changed his clothes, he tried to reassure himself that the man did not come here all the time, and he also warned him that he would not be able to come to the phone. However, remembering their last meeting, he thought that it was indeed strange. He had been so warm that now he was sad. Finally, as he was walking home, a car honked at him and he just caught up with it. Hyon looked back and immediately remembered the car. So he was pleasantly surprised by this sudden meeting. Louvain opened his window and asked why he hadn't noticed him earlier, since he had been driving right behind him for some time. Hyon tried to explain that he didn't think he was being honked at. After that, he asked the man what he was doing here. He told him that they needed to go to a place. Despite the fact that the guy started to ask where they were going, he simply reminded him that it was Tuesday. After a while, they ended up at a museum. Hyon had never been there before, so he looked around and couldn't figure out where they were. Louvain smiled with satisfaction and said that they had come to the Museum of Modern Art. However, he was surprised that there was not a single person around. The man explained that it was because the museum was closed on Tuesdays. It was noticeable that Hyon was very interested, looking at everything around him, because he had never seen anything like it before. Out of the blue, Louvain suggested that he go look at the paintings. The boy asked if they were allowed to go there, so the man said that his mother had connections here. He also said that this museum has a lot of things, from Impressionism to contemporary works. There are both sculptures and paintings. Hyon was impressed by what he saw, but he was most fascinated by the image of Joseph Roulin. The man explained that this is a portrait, that is, an artistic depiction of another person. He also added that a self-portrait is when a person paints himself. Hyon listened to each of his explanations very carefully. It was obvious that he was very interested in everything. Louvain said that the man in the picture was a postman with whom Vincent van Gogh was quite close when he lived in France. They often met in a place where they would go for a drink late at night. Looking at the painting, he said that this is how they became friends. After that, Roulin invited Van Gogh to dinner, and the latter, to thank him, painted his portrait. Hyon was amazed that a person like him responded to the care he had shown with his own talent. Louvain noticed that there were many more paintings in the museum, so he suggested going further. However, Hyon couldn't take his eyes off her. In the end, they walked around many more paintings that impressed with their colors and subjects. Then they came to the main work. Louvain emphasized that this was the painting he wanted to show him the most, called Water Lilies by Claude Monet. Hyon looked at it and could not move. He felt as if it was absorbing him, although it was more like the painting enveloped the person looking at it. The brush strokes were quite intense and demonstrated the artist's full confidence. In his opinion, the color changes showed the flow in a very gentle and delicate way. After all, the eye involuntarily follows the flow of light and allows you to see the picture from beginning to end. Clenching his hand into a fist, he thought that if it were reality, not a canvas, he would jump into it without hesitation to feel calm. Although he realized that it might be difficult for him to breathe, he felt that, even so, everything would be fine. As Hyon evaluated his emotions, he realized that he hadn't even realized that such a picture could exist. So he wondered who had painted it. Louvain watched the boy fascinated and mentally realized that he had done everything right when he brought him here. Noticing his intense excitement, he suggested that he sit down and try to breathe more slowly. However, when he noticed tears on Hyon's face, he began to wipe them away and said that he had not expected him to cry. After that, he expressed his doubts about whether it was worth bringing him here after all. Hyon immediately began to stop him and asked him not to say that, because he was enjoying himself so much. He smiled and said he was just joking. He also added that he really wanted to come here with him. The guy was a little embarrassed, but thanked him for inviting him to this incredible place. Then he smiled gently and emphasized that he was really happy today. Luvan could no longer restrain himself. His feelings prevailed over his mind, and he wanted to kiss the guy immediately. However, after this attempt, Hyon asked what had just happened. He felt ashamed and embarrassed. The man explained that he was trying to comfort him and advised him not to take it too seriously. After that, he took his hand and suggested that they go look at some more paintings, to which he agreed. Hyon recovered a bit and asked the man how he knew so much about painting. On the way, Luvan told him that his mother had always adored art, so she had been telling him about it since childhood. The time in the museum passed very quickly, and they returned to the boy's house in the man's car. Hyon thanked him for a wonderful evening, but he said he didn't need to be thanked. Then he said that he wanted to tell him something else, because if he didn't, he would be very worried when he left. Hyon was confused because he didn't know what it was about, but he was ready to listen. The man clarified that it was about the moment when he comforted him. He expressed hope that he would remember what he was about to tell him. He angrily emphasized that if anyone tried to do the same, he should beat him, and he asked him to repeat these words. The guy was frightened and started repeating word for word what he had just said, not understanding what was happening. However, the man smiled, said that he had done a good job, and emphasized that this was all he needed to remember. Finally, Luvan told the man that it was time to go home, as he was probably very tired. So he got out of the car and they said goodbye. As soon as the car drove away, Hyon stood there, unmoved, remembering everything that had just happened to him. At home, he sat in front of his easel and thought about the man's words that those were quite old paintings, and that the artists had not received special education, as he had. He wondered how they could be so flawless and how they could paint them like that. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a phone call, which was unexpected for the boy. As soon as he picked up the phone, he heard a familiar voice asking him what he was doing. He replied that he couldn't sleep, so he was looking at his paintings, recalling the works from the museum. Luvan asked if it was night in New York and asked if he always went to bed so late. The guy started to get nervous and replied that tonight was different, and his paintings seemed more miserable than usual. He also added that he was constantly thinking about the works of famous artists, and compared to them, his drawings looked too rough and clumsy. Luvan smoked a cigarette and asked me not to talk like that, because there is nothing worse than comparing yourself to others. He emphasized that once you start, it will be hard to stop. He also reminded me that when it comes to his work, there is no reason to do so. When Hyon asked him why he thought so, he replied that he had seen hundreds of paintings, but only his works had something special. The guy admired him for bringing him to the museum so he could see something new, not to compare himself to strangers. The man told him that he was different from those people, just like his paintings, and he should cherish them. Hyon squinted his eyes and admitted that their trip to the museum had indeed become a work of art for him. After the conversation was over, Luvan stood on the balcony for a long time and thought that when it came to the guy, he found it difficult to find the right words. Suddenly, Bella, who had heard everything, started talking to him and asked if he could concentrate on the meeting, as his behavior seemed strange. When he started asking what was wrong, she said that he should be honest with himself and admit that he was calling his boyfriend too often. The man thought about it for a moment and then replied that he probably did it every chance he got. The woman was disgusted and did not understand why he did it all the time without any reason. Luvan turned around and advised her to stop wasting his time and say what she thought about it. So, Bella said that at first she thought he was doing it because he was inspired, but that was not the case. She also asked if there was a reason she didn't know about. The man took his head and said that humans are social animals. He asked her how often she thought Hyon managed to socialize with others. Bella didn't understand why he was asking her this and said that the guy works side by side with people, so he has to communicate with others often. He said that she was wrong because if they decided to say something, the most they could manage was a word or two. The man said that this can lead to a communication disorder, which is the worst thing for a creative person, although it is an undesirable situation for any person. In the end, he summarized that the fact that he was calling him was just for simple human reasons. However, Bella asked him if he was really the right person to help the boy. The man looked around and said with a smile that Hyon had no one but him. The woman was angry because she realized that his relationship with the boy was radically different from all the previous ones. She was surprised that he did not want to admit it. Luvan did not want to pay attention to it. His face was shining with joy and the memories of his recent time at the museum. The next morning, Hyon enjoyed a delicious breakfast. The man again brought him several new desserts, and they were all incredible. However, the boy suddenly started to stab the cake with a fork. It was clear that he was trying to say something. Luvan began to worry that Hyon was having another allergic reaction, so he asked him if he was itching. The boy hastened to tell him that he was fine, but the man noticed that he was worried about something. Suddenly, Hyon held out a piece of dessert and said that he would like to share it with him, even though he knew he didn't like sweets. After a while, the helicopter was already in place, so Bella called Tae-Tom and Luvan and told them it was time to go. However, there was silence in response, which made the woman even more angry, as she was already tired of unexpected events. Suddenly, she heard Tae-Tom's voice asking her to come to him. The woman mumbled that the helicopter had been waiting for them for a long time and did not understand why they were still here. In the far room, she saw a man who told her that Luvan was still lying on the couch and not moving. He noticed that he was barely whispering and talking about some kind of strawberry shortcake with delicate cream or something. Bella noted that it sounded disgusting and came closer to Luvan, trying to explain to him that they had to leave. However, he seemed to be raving about buying more desserts. The woman was angry because she didn't understand what he was talking about and repeated to him that they should have been on their way to Chicago by now. However, the man tried to stand up and asked her to make a list of popular cafes that sell desserts. Tatum sighed heavily and said that he had given up on fixing anything because he was acting like a madman, although Bella pointed out that they couldn't leave things as they were now. When she asked Tae-Tom how much longer it could go on, he said that it would probably be longer than they expected. A few days passed. Hyon went to work and reflected on the fact that Luvan should have been back in New York by now. Holding the phone in his hands, he was glad that he had even called him to say that they would see each other very soon. He tried to get his duties at the hotel done as quickly as possible so that he wouldn't be late today. He was looking out the window and worried whether the man would be late or whether he would be able to arrive on time. At the same time, he heard someone's footsteps behind him. Turning around, he noticed an exhausted Luvan, who could barely stand on his feet, and asked him if he had kept him waiting too long. Then, trying to smile, he apologized for the delay. The guy took off his mask and welcomed him back. He was also happy when the man said that he had brought some other sweets for him. He brought him a plate with a new dessert and suggested that he try it as soon as possible. Hyon thanked him. However, he was hesitant to eat it, so the man asked him why he didn't want to. Hyon explained that the dessert just looked really good. In fact, there was something else that bothered him. They were sitting right next to each other, and he could smell a pleasant aroma coming from the man. Noticing the man's hesitation, Luvan took his fork and said that since it was so, he would try to feed him himself, touching his chin. The man began to ask if it was good. The man closed his eyes and nodded, saying that the morsel was melting in his mouth. Luvan emphasized that he felt full just by watching the man eat. He also added that he had been choosing what to bring him for a long time. Squinting his eyes, the guy thanked him. Although he was very ticklish, he realized that he probably shouldn't move. The man had his own thoughts in his head. He thought that Hyon didn't realize why he was touching him in this way. However, it was only because of his naivety that he could do this, because if he had followed his desires completely, he would have done much more. In addition, looking at Hyon, he suddenly wondered what would happen if he caught his signals and reacted to them. Finally, the man smiled and said that he could eat the rest of the food himself. The boy agreed, although he thought it was a rather ridiculous offer. That day, Hyon returned home quite late when there was not a single person on the street. He immediately went to bed because he was very tired. Since he couldn't fall asleep right away, he had to toss and turn on the bed for a while. However, as soon as he managed to fall into a deep sleep, the door to his apartment opened, shedding bright light on the floor. The man began rummaging through the boy's belongings, trying to find the place where he had hidden his paintings. Hyon heard strange noises, so he suddenly woke up and saw his uncle standing in front of him. The latter angrily began to shout that the boy was too lazy, as he was still lying in bed. Hyon began to make excuses and said that he didn't know he was coming in. He also asked what brought him here so early. The man said that this was his apartment and he could come here whenever he wanted. Then he pointed to the paintings and scolded the guy for not giving them to him as soon as they were ready. Hyon was puzzled as he had hidden his works between other canvases, so they could not be seen easily. So he emphasized that these paintings were not finished yet and asked his uncle to give them back to him. However, the man did not even think about doing so. He hit him and told him not to tell him if painting was the only thing he was good at. He also asked if the boy wanted him to throw him out. The uncle looked at him and shamed him for behaving like that after he had fed him, sheltered him, and raised him. So, he had no choice but to see him off. The next day, Hyon sat at the stadium and tried to calm down after last night. It wasn't easy, though. The places where he had been hit were still throbbing. Clutching his clothes, he sadly remembered that it had been a long time since he had been beaten like that. Perhaps that made it hurt even more. He began to wonder if he had done the right thing and if he would have received fewer blows if he had not argued. However, he also realized something else, that he really wanted to save that painting. As he watched the people around him, he noticed that they looked quite happy. He also wondered what Leuven was doing now. At the same time, Bella asked her husband what he thought about it. However, she smiled ironically when he said that it was a waste of time, although the Boeing would have loved it. She reminded Leuven that they were running out of time and wouldn't make it even if they started designing right away. The man replied that it was not his concern. Then he asked why they couldn't just increase the mass of the ship or something like that. However, the woman explained that if it was heavier, it would be a cruiser. Leuven emphasized that he was just giving an example, although he did not retract his statement that the advantages of both destroyers and cruisers should be strengthened. He explained that destroyers with heavy cruiser specifications have long been on the market. Clicking on the keyboard, he reminded us that he did not want to see more of them. The woman, however, had a completely different opinion. Folding her hands in front of her, she asked if it was too complicated and if it really needed such changes. So he smiled and said that if she really thought so, he might as well fire everyone, since he didn't need incompetent employees. In fact, for the man, it made no difference whether it was a fighter jet or a battleship. However, he didn't think it was a good idea to simply abandon the destroyer and put the fighter on an aircraft carrier. On the contrary, he wanted to make it transformable. Bella was going crazy with his answer, especially when he said that there was no reason not to change the model of the guided missile, because the compact size would make it more invisible. The woman started screaming that he was constantly telling her what to do, and that this happens all the time as soon as she talks to him. However, she was just doing her job.